The price I paid for silence was steep, but the cost speaking would have been devastating. I'm Elizabeth Miller, though most folks just call me Grandma Beth now. I'm 75 years old, sitting on my porch swing in Maine, watching the autumn leaves dance their way to the ground. Time has a way of softening some memories while sharpening others. The ones I'm about to share with you have edges that still cut deep. I was born in 1948 in a small town called Willow Creek, Kentucky, a place so small it barely registered on maps, where everyone knew everyone's business or thought they did. My father, William Carter, was what folks politely called traditional. What they meant was that he ruled our home with an iron fist and believed women were meant to serve, not speak. My mother, Eleanor, was a wisp of a woman who seemed to shrink a little more each year under the weight of his expectations. We lived in a white farmhouse that always needed painting, with fields of tobacco stretching out behind it. Those fields put food on our table and clothes on our backs, but they also trapped us there, rooted to that land like the crops themselves. I had two younger sisters, Margaret and Jane, who looked up to me as if I held all the answers, if only I had. Life changed the summer I turned 12. That's when my father's brother, Uncle Richard, came to live with us. His wife had died and he needed a place to stay while he got back on his feet. The adults spoke in hushed tones about his grief, but all I noticed was how his eyes followed me around the room, how his hand would linger too long when he passed me the potatoes at dinner. "Such a pretty girl," he'd say, tucking my hair behind my ear. "Growing up so fast." My mother would smile nervously. My father would nod with pride, and something cold would settle in my stomach. I started wearing my hair pulled back tight, started wearing baggier clothes, started finding reasons to be out of the house when he was around. But in a small farmhouse with 6 people, there was nowhere to truly hide. The first time it happened, I was doing dishes after dinner. Everyone else had scattered, my father to smoke his pipe on the porch, my mother to put my sisters to bed, Uncle Richard supposedly to the barn to check on something. I was elbow deep in soapy water when I felt him behind me, so close I could smell the tobacco on his breath. "Need some help, Lizzie?" His hand settled on my waist, and I froze. Such a good girl, always helping your mama. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't understand what was happening as his hands moved where they shouldn't. The water in the sink had gone cold by the time he finally left, whistling as he walked out the back door as if nothing had happened. That night, I stared at the ceiling above my bed, trying to make sense of what had occurred. Maybe I had misunderstood. Maybe this was normal and I was overreacting. Maybe if I just avoided being alone with him, it would never happen again. I was wrong on all counts. It became a pattern, a terrible secret rhythm to our household. My father would work the fields, my mother would tend to my sisters, and Uncle Richard would find me alone. Each time I told myself I would scream, I would fight, I would tell someone. Each time I found myself paralyzed, mute with a fear I couldn't name. One afternoon, when my mother was hanging laundry, I tried to tell her. My voice shook as I said, "Mama, Uncle Richard, he touches me sometimes." She stopped, clothespin halfway to the line, her face going still. Then she shook her head and said, "Don't talk nonsense, Elizabeth. Your uncle is family. He's just being affectionate, and you're misunderstanding." She pinned the sheet with more force than necessary. "Don't you go spreading tales. Your daddy would be furious." The message was clear. Keep quiet. Don't rock the boat. Some truths weren't meant to be spoken aloud in our house. So I became a ghost in my own home, trying to fade into the background, trying to disappear. I started staying after school as long as possible, volunteering for any activity that would keep me away from home. I became an expert at knowing which floorboards creaked, which doors couldn't be locked, which corners of the house weren't safe. But the worst part wasn't what was happening to me. The worst part was watching Uncle Richard's eyes begin to follow Margaret the way they had once followed me. She was only 10, still playing with dolls and believing in fairy tales. Something fierce and protective awoke in me then. Something stronger than my fear. I made sure I was always between them. I volunteered to do Margaret's chores. I slept lightly, ready to intervene if I heard him in the hallway at night. I became her shadow and her shield, determined that what was happening to me would never happen to her. Little did I know that my determination to protect my sister would lead me down a path that would forever change all our lives, and that the price of that protection would be paid not just by me, but by a child who didn't yet exist. A child whose existence would both save me and haunt me for the rest of my days. The seasons changed and I turned 13, then 14. Uncle Richard was no longer a temporary guest, but had settled into our family like a disease we'd all learned to live with. My father had come to rely on his help in the fields, and my mother seemed grateful for another adult's company. Only I knew the monster beneath the helpful facade, and I had learned that my voice had no power against him. What I didn't realize was that someone else had noticed the change in me. Mrs. Porter, my English teacher, began keeping me after class, asking questions I couldn't answer. "Is everything all right at home, Elizabeth?" she'd ask, her eyes kind behind her glasses. "You seem different lately. You know you can talk to me about anything." But could I? In our town, family business stayed family business. My father was respected in the community, a deacon at church. Who would believe me over him? Who would risk standing against him? So I smiled and lied and said everything was fine, just tired from chores and schoolwork. Porter didn't look convinced, but she didn't push either. Instead, she gave me books, stories about girls who overcame impossible odds, who fought back, who escaped. I devoured them in secret, hiding them under my mattress where Uncle Richard wouldn't find them. In those pages, I found something I had lost hope. It was a Tuesday in April when I realized I had missed my monthly cycle. At first, I didn't think much of it. It had never been regular. And with all the stress, it wasn't surprising it might be late. But as 1 week stretched into 2, a terrible suspicion began to take root. I was in the school bathroom when the morning sickness hit. Kneeling on the cold tile floor, I heard the door open and looked up to see Jenny Davis, a senior I barely knew. She took one look at me, and her eyes widened with recognition. "How far along are you?" she asked, her voice low. I started to deny it, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I whispered, "I don't know. Maybe 6 weeks?" She nodded, washing her hands slowly. "My cousin was in your situation last year. There's a woman in Mayfield who can take care of it. If that's what you want." I knew what she meant. Everyone had heard whispers about such women, about girls who disappeared for a few days and came back pale and quieter. But the thought filled me with a terror as great as my situation itself. "I don't have any money," I said, which was easier than saying I didn't know if I could do such a thing. Jenny shrugged. "Just thought I'd mention it. Your choice." She hesitated at the door. "Don't wait too long to decide, though. It gets complicated. Complicated. As if my life wasn't already a tangle I couldn't unravel. I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection. I was 15 years old, trapped in a house with my abuser, possibly carrying his child. What choices did I really have? I decided to wait another week, to be sure, but in my heart I already knew. The constant nausea, the tenderness in my breasts, the bone-deep fatigue that no amount of sleep could touch. My body was trying to tell me something my mind didn't want to hear. What I didn't know then was that my secret wouldn't remain mine alone much longer, and when it came to light, it would set in motion events that would either destroy me completely or offer my only chance at escape, a chance that would come at a price I wasn't sure I could pay. The knowledge sat heavy in my chest for days, making it hard to breathe, to think, to function. I walked through my life like a sleepwalker, going through the motions without really being present. At night, I'd lie awake, hand on my still, flat stomach, wondering about the life growing inside me. Not with love. I couldn't bear to love something created from such ugliness, but with a strange, detached curiosity. What would become of us both? It was my mother who finally confronted me, cornering me in the laundry room, where I was desperately trying to let out the waistband of my skirt. Her eyes fell to my fumbling hands, then rose to my face. "Elizabeth," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "are you in trouble?" That simple question broke something in me. Tears I had been holding back for months suddenly flooded forth, and I nodded, unable to speak. My mother's face seemed to age years in seconds. "Who?" she asked, though I think she already knew the answer. When I couldn't say his name, she closed her eyes briefly. "Your father can never know. It would kill him." "Not me," I thought bitterly. It would kill him because even now, facing the evidence of what had been happening under her roof, my mother's first thought was for my father's feelings, his reputation, his peace of mind. "What am I going to do?" I asked, my voice small, childlike. My mother pressed her lips together, thinking, "We'll say you're going to stay with Aunt Judith in Louisville for school. We'll tell everyone you got a special opportunity." She nodded, as if convincing herself. "You'll have the baby there, give it up, and come home when it's all over." Give it up, come home. Back to the house where Uncle Richard still lived, where he could continue what he had started, where my sisters remained vulnerable. The thought made me physically ill. And what about Uncle Richard? I finally forced myself to say his name. My mother flinched. "What about him? He'll still be here, with Margaret and Jane." Something flickered across my mother's face, guilt, realization, fear. "I'll watch them more closely," she said, but there was no conviction in her voice. That night, I made my decision. I would go to Louisville as my mother suggested, but I wouldn't be coming back. Somehow, I would find a way to start over, to build a life far from Willow Creek. But first, I had to make sure my sisters would be safe. I waited until everyone was asleep, then crept to my father's study. The household accounts were kept in a leather ledger in his desk drawer. With shaking hands, I opened it, scanning the neat columns of figures. There it was, the money from the spring tobacco sale, nearly $800 set aside for new equipment, more money than I had ever seen in one place. I stood frozen, staring at the drawer. Taking this money was stealing, was a sin, was something the old Elizabeth would never have contemplated. But I wasn't that girl anymore. That girl had died a little each time Uncle Richard had touched her, had disappeared completely when I realized I was carrying his child. I took $400. enough to get away, but not so much that my family would be ruined. Then I wrote a letter, my hands steady despite the gravity of what I was doing. Dear Daddy, I know about Uncle Richard and what he's been doing to Elizabeth. I've seen it with my own eyes. If he ever touches me or Jane, or if anything happens to Elizabeth while she's away, I'll tell everyone, Pastor Miles, Sheriff Davis, the whole town. I have proof. Don't try to find it, Margaret. It was a bluff. Margaret knew nothing, had no proof, but my father wouldn't know that. Fear would keep my sisters safer than any promise from my mother. I slipped the note under Margaret's pillow where she would find it in the morning after I was gone. I packed a small bag, one change of clothes, my mother's old locket, the book Mrs. Porter had given me. As dawn broke, I left through the back door, walking the 5 miles to the bus station in town. The ticket to Louisville cost nearly all I had, but as the bus pulled away, carrying me from the only home I'd ever known, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Whatever lay ahead, poverty, hardship, the scandal of an unwed mother, it couldn't be worse than what I was leaving behind. What I didn't realize then was that my journey was just beginning, and that the child I carried, a child I had neither wanted nor planned for, would become both my greatest challenge and my most unexpected blessing. That through this child I would find a strength I never knew I possessed and build a life I never dared to imagine. A life that would decades later lead me to this porch, to these memories, to the understanding that sometimes the deepest wounds can become the source of our greatest healing. I arrived in Louisville on a sweltering June day, the city bigger and louder than anything I had ever experienced. The crowds at the bus station overwhelmed me, so many people rushing in different directions, no one making eye contact, no one noticing a terrified pregnant teenager with a single suitcase. I had told my mother I would stay with Aunt Judith, but that was a lie. Aunt Judith would have sent me straight home. Instead, I had the address of a Catholic women's shelter I had found in a pamphlet at the bus station back home. It took me 3 tries and most of my remaining money to find a taxi driver willing to take me there. St. Catherine's Home for Women was a forbidding brick building with narrow windows and a heavy wooden door. A nun answered my knock, her eyes taking in my youth, my suitcase, the way my hand rested protectively on my still flat stomach. "I need a place to stay," I said, trying to keep my voice from trembling, "just until I figure things out." Sister Mary Margaret, that was her name, a coincidence that made me think of the sister I'd left behind, led me to a small office where I told a version of my story. Not the whole truth, I couldn't bear to speak it aloud, but enough. I was pregnant, unwed, unable to return home. "We can provide shelter, basic medical care, and assistance placing the child for adoption," she explained, her voice kind but matter-of-fact. "In return, you'll help with chores, attend daily services, and abide by our rules." It wasn't much of a choice, but it was the only one I had. I agreed and was shown to a dormitory where a dozen other girls and women lived, all in various stages of pregnancy, all with stories they kept close to their chests. We were a silent sisterhood, united by circumstance but divided by shame. The routine at St. Catherine's was strict. Wake at 6 a.m., attend Mass, breakfast, chores, lunch, educational sessions, basic child care, home economics, moral guidance, more chores, dinner, evening prayers, lights out at night. The work was hard but not unpleasant. Laundering, cooking, cleaning, and it kept my mind occupied, preventing it from wandering to the past or worrying about the future. It was in my 3rd month at St. Catherine's that I met the woman who would change the course of my life. Dr. Helen Richards came to the home once a week to check on the residents. She was unlike any woman I had ever met, confident, outspoken, with a sharp intelligence that shone in her eyes. In her 50s, unmarried, devoted to her career when most women her age were grandmothers, she fascinated me. During my examination, she noticed the bruises on my arms, old ones from when Uncle Richard had held me down, new ones from carrying heavy laundry baskets at the home. "Who did this to you?" she asked directly, her fingers gentle on my skin. Something about her directness, her lack of judgment, broke through my carefully constructed walls. Before I knew what was happening, I was telling her everything. Uncle Richard, my mother's denial, my father's blindness, my sisters left behind. The words poured out of me like a dam breaking, unstoppable, once they began. Dr. Richards listened without interruption, her face growing graver with each revelation. When I finally fell silent, she sat beside me on the examination table and took my hand. "Elizabeth," she said, "what happened to you was not your fault. Not any of it. And what you did, protecting your sisters, finding the courage to leave, that took extraordinary strength. No one had ever called me strong before. In my family, women were meant to be obedient, dutiful, self-sacrificing, but never strong. The word felt foreign, ill-fitting, but I held on to it nonetheless. "The baby," I whispered. "I don't know if I can give it up, but I don't know if I can love it either, knowing who it came from." Dr. Richards squeezed my hand. "That's a decision only you can make, but I want you to know that this child is innocent, just as you were, and that children aren't carbon copies of their parents, neither the good parts nor the bad." She paused, seeming to consider something. "I have a colleague in Boston, a doctor with a private practice. She needs an assistant, someone to help with filing, appointments, basic care. The position comes with a small room above the practice. It wouldn't be much, but it would be a start, a way for you to support yourself and the child if you choose to keep it." Hope fluttered in my chest, fragile as a baby bird. "But I don't have any training, any experience." "You can learn," she said simply. "And Boston is far from Kentucky. No one would know your history, your circumstances. You could start fresh." A fresh start. The words echoed in my mind, tantalizing in their possibility, but there was still so much standing in my way. No money, no education, a baby on the way, the sisters I had left behind. "I'll think about it," I said, not daring to fully embrace the opportunity yet. Dr. Richards nodded. "The offer stands. Meanwhile, I've brought you something." She reached into her bag and pulled out a book, The Feminine Mystique by Betty Friedan. "This might help you see that there are other ways to live, other choices women can make." I took the book, running my fingers over its cover. "Thank you," I said, the words inadequate for the gift she was offering. Not just the book, but a glimpse of a different kind of future. That night, after lights out, I lay in my narrow bed, one hand on my growing belly, the other holding a flashlight under my blanket as I read Friedan's words. With each page, I felt something shifting inside me, not the baby, but something deeper, a sense of possibility I had never allowed myself to feel before. Fell asleep with the book open on my chest, dreaming of Boston, of freedom, of a life where I made my own choices. What I didn't know then was that the road to that life would be even more challenging than the one that had brought me to St. Catherine's, and that the child growing inside me would become both my greatest responsibility and my unexpected salvation. The months at St. Catherine's passed in a blur of swollen ankles, backaches, and quiet desperation. My belly grew, stretching my borrowed maternity clothes and my patience. The other girls came and went, some returning to families who had forgiven them, others leaving their babies behind and disappearing to restart their lives, pretending the whole episode had never happened. I spoke with Dr. Richards each week during her visits, and each time she gently asked if I had made my decision: Boston or adoption. A new life with a child born of violence, or a fresh start unburdened by constant reminders of the past. "I just don't know," I told her week after week. "How can I look at this baby and not see him? Him, my uncle, the monster who had stolen my childhood." "You'll see yourself too," Dr. Richards said, "and you'll see who this child becomes, separate from how they began." I wasn't convinced, but I was running out of time to decide. St. Catherine's allowed mothers to stay up to 6 weeks after delivery before requiring them to move on, either with their babies or without them. It was a cold January morning when my labor began, 2 weeks earlier than expected. The contractions started as a dull ache in my back, gradually intensifying until I couldn't speak through them. Sister Mary Margaret called for an ambulance, and I was rushed to the hospital, terrified and alone at 16 years old. The delivery room was bright and clinical, the nurses efficient but distant. This was a charity ward, and unwed mothers were treated with a mixture of pity and disapproval. I bit down on my lip to keep from screaming, tasting blood as the pain ripped through me. 18 hours later, exhausted beyond comprehension, I heard a cry, strong, indignant, alive. "A girl," the doctor announced, holding up my daughter, red-faced and perfect. A girl, not a boy who might grow to look like Uncle Richard, to remind me daily of what had happened. A daughter, mine. They placed her on my chest. This tiny person with a shock of dark hair and eyes squeezed shut against the harsh hospital lights. She nuzzled against me instinctively, seeking comfort, seeking me, and in that moment, something shifted inside my heart. This wasn't his child. This was my child, my daughter. And suddenly, with a clarity that took my breath away, I knew I couldn't give her up. Whatever hardships lay ahead, we would face them together. I named her Emily, after the poet Emily Dickinson, whose work I had discovered in one of the books Dr. Richards brought me. Emily, who wrote about hope being the thing with feathers, my own hope made flesh, a new beginning. When Dr. Richards visited us at the hospital the next day, she took one look at my face as I held Emily and smiled. "Boston it is, then," she said, and I nodded, tears spilling down my cheeks. The next 6 weeks were a crash course in motherhood, sleepless nights, sore breasts, the terror of being solely responsible for such a fragile life. The sisters at St. Catherine's helped as much as they could, showing me how to bathe her, how to swaddle her, how to soothe her cries, but they also reminded me constantly that our time there was wooded. Dr. Richards made the arrangements. Her colleague in Boston, Dr. Susan Parker, agreed to hire me sight unseen, trusting Helen's judgment. A train ticket was purchased. A small apartment above the practice was furnished with second-hand basics. All that remained was for me to get there with Emily and begin our new life. The night before we left, Sister Mary Margaret came to my room. She handed me an envelope containing $50, a collection taken up by the staff. For emergencies, she said. Then, more softly, "You're doing the right thing, Elizabeth. That child needs her mother." I thanked her, touched by the unexpected kindness. As she turned to leave, she added, "You might consider changing your name when you get to Boston. A fresh start in every way." The suggestion startled me, but the more I thought about it, the more sense it made. Elizabeth Carter had been a victim, perhaps someone new could be a survivor. The journey to Boston was the longest of my life. Emily cried for much of the train ride, earning us dirty looks from other passengers. I was exhausted, anxious, second-guessing my decision with every mile that took us further from Kentucky, but there was no going back. Not to St. Catharines, certainly not to Willow Creek. We arrived in Boston on a snowy February afternoon. Dr. Parker met us at the station, a tall woman with silver-streaked black hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She didn't ask questions, didn't comment on my youth or Emily's fatherless state. She simply took us to our new home, showed me the small apartment with its single bedroom, tiny kitchen and shared bathroom down the hall. "Rest today," she said, handing me a key. "We'll start your training tomorrow." Left alone with Emily in the quiet apartment, I looked out the window at the unfamiliar city spread below us. Boston, Massachusetts, over 1,000 miles from Willow Creek. No one here knew me. No one knew what had happened, where Emily had come from. We could be anyone. Standing there, with my daughter sleeping in my arms and a new life waiting to begin, I made a decision. "My name is Sarah Miller," I whispered, trying the name on for size. Sarah, princess in Hebrew, my Sunday school teacher had once told me. Miller, common enough to blend in, forgettable. Elizabeth Carter was gone. Sarah Miller had taken her place, and Sarah Miller was going to build a life for herself and her daughter, no matter what it took. What I didn't realize then was how much it would take, how many sacrifices, how much heartache, how many lies would be necessary to protect Emily from the truth of her origins, or that decades later those lies would create a chasm between us that I wasn't sure could ever be bridged. But that afternoon in Boston, all I knew was that we had escaped. We were safe, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel something dangerously close to hope. The first year in Boston nearly broke me. Working at Dr. Parker's practice was demanding, filing systems to learn, medical terminology to memorize, patients to schedule and reassure. Emily was colicky, crying for hours each night until I thought I might lose my mind from exhaustion. The apartment was always cold, the shared bathroom always occupied when we needed it most, the neighbors too curious about the young single mother in their midst. But slowly, painfully, we settled into a routine. Dr. Parker was strict but fair, increasing my responsibilities as I proved myself capable. She taught me to give injections, take blood pressure, recognize symptoms of common illnesses. When she discovered I had a knack for calming anxious patients, she began having me assist during examinations, holding hands, offering quiet reassurance. Emily began sleeping through the night around her first birthday, a gift that felt like a miracle after months of Bowen rest. She was growing into a beautiful child, dark hair like mine, green eyes that must have come from somewhere in my family's genetics, a smile that could light up the room. "Dada?" she asked one day, pointing at a picture in a children's book. My heart seized. It was a question that would come up more and more as she grew, and I needed an answer ready. "Your daddy isn't with us, sweetheart," I said, choosing my words carefully. "He had to go away before you were born." Not a lie, but not the truth either. The first of many half-truths I would tell her over the years. Dr. Parker became something of a mentor to me, encouraging me to get my GED when Emily started attending the daycare center run by the church down the street. "You're too smart to be just an assistant forever," she told me. "You could be a nurse, maybe even a doctor someday." The idea seemed laughable at first. Me, a doctor? But the seed was planted, and I found myself studying late into the night after Emily was asleep, borrowing medical textbooks from Dr. Parker, absorbing knowledge like a sponge. I made a few friends, other single mothers at the daycare, a neighbor who sometimes watched Emily when I worked late, the librarian who set aside books she thought I might enjoy. Not close friendships. I kept a part of myself guarded, afraid that getting too close meant risking my secrets being discovered, but connections that made Boston begin to feel like home. We moved to a slightly larger apartment for Emily's 3rd birthday, a place with our own bathroom and a tiny room that was just hers. I painted it yellow, hung paper stars from the ceiling, filled a bookshelf with stories, creating the childhood for her that I wished I'd had, safe, secure, filled with possibility. It was around this time that I received the only communication ever to reach me from Willow Creek. A letter addressed to Elizabeth Carter, forwarded from St. Catharines, who knew my new address but had promised not to share it. With trembling hands, I opened it to find a short note from Margaret. "Dear Lizzie, Mother told us you decided to stay in Louisville, that you married and have a new life. I hope that's true and you're happy. Uncle Richard left last summer. Daddy and he had a big fight, though no one will say what about. Things are better at home now. I miss you. Love, Margaret." I read the letter a dozen times, tears blurring the words. My plan had worked. My bluff had protected my sisters. Richard was gone. But the cost had been high. My family thought I had abandoned them, chosen a new life over them. In a way, they were right. I never wrote back. It seemed kinder, safer to let them believe whatever story made sense to them. Let them think Elizabeth had found happiness, had moved on. It was easier than the truth that Elizabeth no longer existed at all. As Emily grew, so did her questions. By the time she started kindergarten, she had constructed an elaborate valitus about her absent father. He was a soldier, a hero, someone who would have loved her if only he'd had the chance. I neither confirmed nor denied these stories, letting her believe what brought her comfort. Another lie of omission. Another brick in the wall between us. Dr. Parker encouraged me to enroll in nursing classes at the community college when Emily turned 7. "You've practically been working as a nurse already," she pointed out. "Might as well get the credentials and the pay that goes with it." It meant even longer hours, even less sleep, juggling coursework with motherhood and my job. But it also meant a future beyond just surviving, a career, financial stability, respect. I threw myself into it with a determination that surprised even me. Emily thrived in school, bright and curious and social in ways I had never been. She made friends easily, brought home perfect report cards, joined the Girl Scouts. I watched her grow with a mixture of pride and fear. Pride in the person she was becoming, fear that somehow, someday, the darkness of her conception would touch her perfect life. The nightmares never fully went away. I would wake gasping, certain I could feel Uncle Richard's hands on me, Sure, I could smell his tobacco-stained breath. On those nights, I would creep into Emily's room and watch her sleep, reminding myself that something beautiful had come from something terrible, that we had escaped, that we were safe. But were we? That question haunted me as Emily approached adolescence. She had my dark hair, my stubborn chin, but those green eyes, they were his. Unmistakably his. Would she look in the mirror one day and somehow know? Would her body carry some memory of the violence that created her? These fears kept me awake long after the nightmares faded. I graduated from nursing school when Emily was 11, a moment of triumph that felt almost unreal. Dr. Parker hosted a small celebration at her home, inviting the staff from the practice and a few of my classmates. Emily wore her best dress and proudly told everyone, "My mom's a nurse now." My mom, not knowing that I had been younger than she was now when I gave birth to her, not knowing that I had been a scared, broken girl running from a past too painful to speak of, not knowing that every achievement, every step forward had been for her as much as for myself. That night, after the celebration, Emily sat on the edge of my bed, watching me remove my makeup. "Mom," she said thoughtfully, "where does our family come from?" My hand froze, the washcloth pressed to my cheek. "What do you mean, sweetie?" Katie Goldstein knows all about her grandparents in Poland, and Maria Rodriguez is going to visit her cousins in Puerto Rico this summer. But I don't know anything about our family. Don't I have grandparents somewhere? The question I had been dreading for years, finally asked directly. I had prepared for this, had rehearsed answers, but now they all seemed inadequate. I settled for another partial truth. "My parents died when I was very young," I said, focusing on removing my mascara to avoid meeting her eyes. "There was an accident. I grew up in foster care." The lie came easier than I expected. "That's so sad," Emily said, her voice full of genuine sympathy. "What about my dad's family?" "He was an only child, and his parents had already passed when I met him." Another lie, another betrayal of the daughter I loved more than life itself. Emily was quiet for a moment. "So it's just us," she said finally. "You and me." I turned to her then, taking her hands in mine. "You and me," I agreed. "But that's enough, isn't it? We're a family, you and I." She smiled, seemingly satisfied with this answer, and kissed my cheek before heading to her own room. But as I finished getting ready for bed, I caught sight of myself in the mirror and hardly recognized the woman staring back. Sarah Miller, RN, mother, survivor, liar. The word echoed in my mind, accusing. I had built our life on a foundation of untruths, omissions, fabrications, done it out of love, out of a desperate need to protect her, but done it nonetheless. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me, that one day those lies might cost me the very thing I had been trying to protect: my relationship with my daughter. What I didn't know then was how soon that day would come, or that the truth, when it finally emerged, would come not from my past catching up to us, but from Emily herself making a discovery that would shake both our lives to the core. The teenage years brought a new set of challenges. Emily remained a good student, but she developed a rebellious streak that both worried and secretly pleased me. I had been so compliant, so afraid to speak up or stand out. My daughter, by contrast, had opinions on everything and wasn't afraid to voice them. "Why can't I stay out until midnight?" "Joanne's mom lets her," she would argue, hands on hips, green eyes flashing with indignation. I'm not Joanne's mom, I would reply, trying to balance firmness with understanding. I'm your mom, and in this house, curfew is 10 o'clock. These conflicts, as frustrating as they were, reassured me in a way. Emily felt safe enough to push boundaries, to test limits, to assert herself. She had none of the fear that had defined my own adolescence. No sense that disagreement might lead to danger. I had given her that security, that confidence, and I fiercely protected it even when her teenage dramatics tested my patience. By 15, Emily had developed an interest in genealogy, sparked by a history project at school. I need to make a family tree, she announced one evening, spreading blank charts across our kitchen table. I know we don't have much family, but I still need to fill this out. My stomach nodded. What exactly do you need? Names, birth dates, birthplaces, as far back as we can go. Mr. Harrison says we might find surprising connections. Her enthusiasm was palpable, her face alight with the thrill of discovery. I manufactured what details I could, giving my fictitious parents names from books I had read, creating siblings who had never existed, inventing a family history rooted in the Midwest rather than Kentucky. For Emily's father, I elaborated on the story I had maintained over the years. Thomas Miller, born in Vermont, only child of deceased parents killed in a car accident before Emily was born. I even produced a worn photograph of a handsome young man, actually a distant cousin of Dr. Parker's, and presented it as her father. Emily studied the photo intently. I have his eyes, she said, looking up at me. Don't I? The statement hit me like a physical blow. Those green eyes, the ones that sometimes made my heart stop when they flashed with certain expressions. She believed they came from this kind stranger, this fiction I had created. Yes, I managed to say, you do. She completed her project, proudly displaying a family tree filled with ghosts and inventions. I told myself the lies were necessary, protective, kind, but each one added to the weight I carried, the distance between who I was and who I pretended to be. When Emily turned 16, she announced her intention to become a doctor. Like Dr. Parker, she explained, making a difference, helping people when they're vulnerable. The irony wasn't lost on me that my daughter, conceived in violence, born in shame, wanted to dedicate her life to healing. I encouraged her ambitions, working extra shifts to set aside money for college, helping her study for exams, celebrating each academic achievement. Parker became a mentor to her as she had been to me, arranging for Emily to shadow physicians at the hospital, writing glowing recommendations for summer programs. It was one of these programs, a 6-week medical internship at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, that changed everything. Emily, 17 and brimming with excitement, had been accepted based on her stellar grades and Dr. Parker's connections. I was proud, terrified, and secretly relieved to have a brief respite from the constant vigilance of maintaining my elaborate fiction. The night before she left, we stayed up late packing, checking and rechecking that she had everything she needed. As I folded her white lab coat, a gift from Dr. Parker, Emily sat cross-legged on her bed, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Mom," she said slowly, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that, sweetheart?" I continued folding, not looking up. "I want to find out if I have any medical conditions I should know about. Family history stuff, you know. It's important for doctors to know their own genetic risks." My hands stilled on the crisp white fabric. "We've talked about our family medical history before. There's nothing concerning that I know of." Emily hesitated. That's just it, Mom. You don't really know, do you? I mean, you were so young when your parents died, and you never knew my dad's family well. There could be heart disease, cancer tendencies, all sorts of things we're unaware of. I forced myself to continue folding to keep my voice steady. I suppose that's possible, but most of those things would have shown up by now, either in you or me. Not necessarily. Emily's voice took on the authoritative tone she used when explaining medical facts, a tone that simultaneously irritated and impressed me. Many genetic conditions don't manifest until later in life. That's why I've decided to do genetic testing. The lab coat slipped from my suddenly numb fingers. Genetic testing? There's a research study at Johns Hopkins during my internship. They're mapping genetic markers for various diseases, and participants get a full health screening plus information about their ancestry. I've already signed up. She sounded so proud, so certain this was the right thing to do. I sat heavily on the edge of her bed, my mind racing. Genetic testing, ancestry information. The careful fiction I had constructed over 17 years could unravel with a simple blood test or cheek swab. Emily would learn she wasn't primarily of Northern European descent as I had claimed. She might even discover my relatives in Kentucky. People who knew Elizabeth Carter, who knew what had happened, who could tell her the truth I had so carefully hidden. I don't think that's necessary, I said, trying to keep the panic from my voice. Those tests are still experimental, not always accurate. Emily's expression shifted from excitement to confusion. Why are you against this? It's just health information, Mom. Knowledge is power, right? That's what you always say. I struggled to find a plausible objection, something that wouldn't raise her suspicions further. It's expensive, for one thing. It's free as part of the study. They even pay a small stipend. And time-consuming. One blood draw and a cheek swab takes 15 minutes. I was running out of excuses. I just don't think it's necessary, Emily. We're both healthy. There's no reason to go looking for problems. She studied my face, her green eyes narrowing slightly. Mom, what aren't you telling me? You're acting really weird about this. I'm not acting weird, I said too quickly. I just think you should focus on your internship, not get distracted by side projects. Emily was silent for a long moment, then said quietly, I already sent in the preliminary paperwork. They're expecting me in the study. It would be strange to back out now without a good reason. I felt trapped, cornered by my own lies. I could forbid her from participating. She was still a minor, technically under my authority, but doing so would only intensify her suspicions, push her to dig deeper. Yet, letting her proceed meant risking everything. Do what you think is best, I finally said, standing up and smoothing non-existent wrinkles from my clothes. You're almost an adult. I can't make these decisions for you forever. Relief flooded her face. Thanks, Mom. I knew you'd understand once you thought about it. This could help a lot of people, and it might give us some answers about our family health history. Answers, if only she knew what questions to ask, what truths lay buried beneath the life we had built. That night, after Emily had gone to bed, I sat at our kitchen table with a glass of wine, contemplating my options. I could tell her the truth before she left, rip off the bandage in one excruciating motion. I could leave, disappear before the results came back. I could try to sabotage the testing somehow. Each option seemed worse than the last. The truth might destroy her, might shatter her sense of self. Running away would be abandoning her when she needed me most. Interference would be discovered, would only deepen her eventual suspicion. In the end, I did nothing. I drove her to the airport the next morning, hugged her tightly, told her how proud I was, how much I loved her, and as her plane took off carrying her toward a truth I had spent 17 years hiding, I realized that the foundations of our life together were about to be tested in ways I had always feared but never truly prepared for. 6 weeks. That's how long I had to wait, to wonder, to worry about what Emily might discover in Baltimore. We spoke on the phone every few days, she bubbling with excitement about surgical observations, lab work, new friends, me forcing enthusiasm, asking carefully casual questions about the research study. "Oh, that was the first day," she said. "Just a blood draw and a cheek swab, like I said. They're processing thousands of samples, so we won't get results until after the program ends. They'll mail them to us. A reprieve, but a temporary one." The results would still come, would still contain revelations I wasn't ready for her to face. When Emily returned home, tanned and confident and somehow more adult than when she'd left, I searched her face for signs of discovery, of changed perception, but there were none. Just my daughter, excited about her senior year of high school, full of plans for college applications and future medical studies. Life resumed its normal rhythm. I continued working at the hospital, where I had moved after completing my nursing degree. Emily started her final year of high school. We argued about curfews and college choices and whether her new boyfriend, Michael, was allowed to visit when I wasn't home. Ordinary mother-daughter conflicts that felt precious in their normalcy, knowing what might be coming. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in October, a large manila envelope addressed to Emily from Johns Hopkins University. I recognized it immediately for what it was, the genetic testing results, and considered, briefly, making it disappear. But the deception had gone on long enough. Whatever came next, we would face it. Emily opened the envelope that evening, spreading the contents across the kitchen table, charts, graphs, medical terminology that meant little to me but that she scanned with practiced ease. "Good news, Mom," she said, looking up with a smile. "No major genetic red flags, low risk for heart disease, Alzheimer's, most cancers, though we should both be vigilant about breast cancer screenings. Slightly elevated risk there." I nodded, relief washing through me. Maybe this wouldn't be as bad as I feared. That is good news. "And check this out," she continued, turning to another page. "The ancestry portion. It's fascinating." She studied the colorful pie chart. Mostly British Isles, like we thought, but there are some surprises. Southern European, probably Italian or Greek, and look, about 15% Native American. We have indigenous ancestry, Mom. Did you know that? I stared at the chart, momentarily speechless. My father had often spoken proudly of his Cherokee great-grandmother, a family legend I had forgotten until this moment. That DNA, that heritage, had passed from him to me, to Emily, a connection I had never considered, had never thought to include in my fabricated history. I had heard something about that, I stammered. "A distant relative, I think." Emily's excitement faded, replaced by puzzlement. "But you never mentioned it. Not once. In all our family history discussions." "It didn't seem important," I said weakly. "Just a family story, not confirmed." She frowned, turning back to the papers. "There's more. They found genetic relatives in the database, distant cousins, most likely. People who share enough DNA markers to indicate family connections." She scanned the list. Most are very distant, fourth or fifth cousins, but there's one closer match. A third cousin, maybe second once removed. Someone named Margaret Wilson, living in Tennessee. Margaret, my sister. Margaret Wilson now, not Carter, married with a different name, but still in Tennessee, still findable. The room seemed to tilt around me. Mom? Emily's voice came from far away. Are you okay? You look pale. I gripped the edge of the table, steadying myself. I'm fine, just surprised by all this information. Emily was looking at me strangely now, her analytical mind, the same mind that made her an excellent student, working through inconsistencies, anomalies, things that didn't align with what she knew or thought she knew. Tennessee, she said slowly. You never mentioned family in Tennessee. You said your family was from Illinois. Distant relatives, I said. People I wouldn't know. She wasn't satisfied. But this Margaret Wilson, she's not that distant. And the name is familiar somehow. She tapped her fingers on the table, thinking. Then her eyes widened. Wait, that box in your closet, the one with your keepsakes? There was a birthday card signed Margaret. I saw it when I was looking for your nursing school diploma last year. The birthday card? A moment of weakness 5 years ago when I had written to St. Catherine's home, asking if they had any information about my family. They had forwarded a birthday card Margaret had sent years before. Somehow knowing I was there, I had kept it, unable to throw away that small connection to my past. You were going through my things? I asked, trying to deflect. Don't change the subject, Mom. Who is Margaret Wilson? And why did you tell me we had no family when apparently we do? The moment I had dreaded for 17 years had arrived. My daughter, my reason for living, was looking at me with suspicion, with dawning realization that I had lied to her, perhaps not about everything, but about enough. It's complicated, Emily, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Then uncomplicate it, she demanded. I'm not a child anymore. Whatever you've been hiding, I can handle it. Her green eyes, his eyes, bored into mine, demanding truth. I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts, to find a way to tell this story that wouldn't destroy us both. You're right. You deserve the truth. But it's not an easy truth, Emily, and once I tell you, things will change between us. Are you sure you want that? For a moment, uncertainty flickered across her face. Then determination set in. I want to know who I am, Mom, where I come from. No more lies. No more lies, such a simple request, yet so devastating in its implications. I nodded slowly, accepting that the time for protection through deception was over. All right, I said, but not here at the table. Let's sit in the living room. This is going to take some time. We moved to the couch, Emily perching on the edge as if ready to flee, me sinking into the cushions as if they might absorb the blow of what was to come. And then, slowly, painfully, I began to tell her the truth about Willow Creek, about Uncle Richard, about the pregnancy and escape, about Elizabeth Carter becoming Sarah Miller. I didn't spare myself, didn't try to justify the lies beyond the desperate need to protect her, to give her a life untainted by the violence of her conception. Emily listened in silence, her face growing paler with each revelation. When I finally fell silent, she sat motionless, tears streaming down her cheeks. So my father isn't dead, she said finally, her voice hollow. No, I admitted, though I don't know if he's still alive. I haven't had any contact with that family since I left. My father is your uncle, My father raped you. She struggled with the words, with the reality they represented. I reached for her hand, but she pulled away. Richard Carter is not your father, Emily. Biologically, yes, but in every way that matters, no. He contributed DNA, nothing more. He has never been, will never be your father. But I came from him, she whispered. Part of me comes from a monster. No, I said firmly, you came from me. From my body, my love, my protection. The circumstances of your conception don't define you, Emily. They never have. She stood abruptly, wrapping her arms around herself. I need some time. I can't. I need to think. I nodded, understanding, but heartbroken. Take whatever time you need. I'll be here when you're ready to talk more. She walked to her room, closing the door quietly behind her. No slamming, no dramatic exit. Somehow that measured response was more worrying than any outburst would have been. My daughter, always in control, even in the face of revelations that would shatter most people's sense of self. I remained on the couch, listening to the silence from her room, wondering if I had just lost the most precious thing in my life. Her trust, her love, our future together. The truth had been told, the lies exposed. Now all that remained was to see what would rise from their ashes. The following days were the loneliest of my life since those first weeks at St. Catherine's. Emily moved through our apartment like a ghost, going to school, returning, doing homework, all with minimal interaction. She answered direct questions with monosyllables, ate little, spent hours in her room with the door closed. I gave her space, though every maternal instinct screamed to pull her close, to force the conversation, to make things right. On the third night, I was awakened by sounds from the kitchen. I found Emily sitting at the table, the genetic testing results spread before her, a mug of tea gone cold at her elbow. I can't sleep, she said without looking up. I keep thinking about everything. I sat across from her, not speaking, waiting. Did you ever consider abortion? She asked suddenly, her voice clinical, detached. Given the circumstances, no one would have blamed you. The question cut deep, but I answered honestly. Yes, I considered it. There was even a woman in Mayfield who could have done it for a price. Why didn't you? I considered my answer carefully. At first, because I had no money, no way to get to her. Then, because I was afraid it wasn't safe, and girls died from such procedures. And finally, because by the time I had the means and opportunity, I had already begun to think of you as separate from what had happened, as innocent, as mine. Emily nodded slowly, processing. All these years you've been living with this, carrying this secret, these memories. It must have been unbearable sometimes. Not unbearable, I said softly. Because I had you. You made it bearable, Emily. You gave my life meaning when I thought all meaning had been stolen from it. She looked up then, really meeting my eyes for the first time since the revelation. I'm angry, she said. Not about what happened to you, though that makes me sick and furious, but about the lies. All my life, I've been someone else, someone made up. Sarah Miller's daughter, Thomas Miller's child, but none of that is real. You are real, I insisted. Your experiences, your personality, your achievements, those are all real. Only the names were changed, only the backdrop was altered. But don't you see, it changes everything. My whole identity was built on a foundation of lies. Her voice rose slightly, the first crack in her composed facade. I don't even know what to call myself now. Who am I? Elizabeth Carter's daughter? The product of incest and rape? Is that who I am? I flinched at the harshness of her words, but held steady. You're Emily, my daughter. A brilliant student, a compassionate friend, a future doctor. Those truths haven't changed. She shook her head, unconvinced. I need to know more about the Carters, about Willow Creek, about him. She couldn't bring herself to say, my father or even your uncle. I need to understand where I come from, the whole truth, not just the parts you've decided I can handle. Fear gripped me. Emily, there's nothing good to be found there. Only pain. That's my decision to make now, she said firmly. I'm 17, almost 18, old enough to know the truth, all of it. I recognized the determined set of her jaw, my determination reflected back at me. What are you planning to do? I want to contact Margaret Wilson, my aunt, I guess. Your sister. I want to hear her side of the story, learn about the family you left behind. The thought of Emily communicating with Margaret, potentially opening a door to the past I had so desperately tried to seal shut, terrified me. But I recognized that look in her eyes. She would do this with or without my blessing, with or without my help. Better that I remain involved, that I help her navigate these treacherous waters. All right, I said reluctantly, but let me contact her first. It's been over 17 years. She thinks I'm living in Louisville, married to someone named Thomas. This will be a shock to her too. Emily considered this, then nodded. That's fair, but I want to be there when you call. I want to hear everything, no more filtered truths. Agreed. I reached across the table, offering my hand. After a moment's hesitation, she took it, a tenuous reconnection, fragile but real. That night marked a turning point, not a return to what we had been, but the beginning of something new. Emily and I were negotiating a different relationship, one built on painful honesty rather than protective lies. It was harder, rawer, but perhaps ultimately stronger for its authenticity. The next day, I called the number listed in the genetic testing results. A woman answered on the third ring, her voice carrying the soft Kentucky accent I had worked so hard to erase from my own speech. Margaret Wilson speaking. Margaret, I said, my voice catching. It's Elizabeth, your sister. The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. Then, a gasped, Lizzie? Is it really you? It's me, I confirmed, though I go by Sarah now, Sarah Miller. My God, she breathed. After all these years, where are you? What happened? We thought. It's complicated, I interrupted, and I'm not alone. My daughter is here with me, your niece. Her name is Emily. Another shocked silence. You have a daughter? But the baby, we were told you gave it up for adoption. I kept her, I said simply. She's 17 now, about to finish high school. And she recently did some genetic testing. That's how we found you. Genetic testing, Margaret repeated, sounding bewildered. I did that too, a few months back. John, that's my husband. He was curious about his heritage, and I thought, why not? I never imagined. Margaret, I said, cutting to the heart of it. Emily knows everything. About Uncle Richard, about why I left, and she wants to know more about her family, about you, about our parents, about everything. The line went quiet again, but I could hear her breathing, processing. I see, she said finally. And what do you want, Lizzie Sarah? A fair question, one I wasn't sure how to answer. I want Emily to have what she needs. And I suppose I want to know what happened after I left. If you and Jane were safe. We were, Margaret said, her voice softening. Your letter worked. Daddy confronted Uncle Richard, threw him out. There was a huge fight. I've never seen Daddy so angry. Richard left town and we never saw him again. As far as I know, he never knew about the baby. Relief washed through me. My desperate gamble had worked better than I could have hoped. And Father? Mother passed 5 years ago. Cancer. Daddy's still alive, though his health isn't good. He's living with Jane and her family now. I tried to picture my father as an old man, dependent on the care of others, stripped of the power and authority that had once defined him. It was almost impossible to reconcile with the towering figure of my childhood. I'm sorry about Mother, I said, meaning it despite everything. She changed after you left, Margaret said quietly, became quieter, sadder. I think she carried a lot of guilt for not protecting you. I closed my eyes against sudden tears, too little, too late. But still, somehow it mattered. Emily, who had been listening intently to my side of the conversation, gestured for the phone, hesitated, then handed it to her. Hello, Aunt Margaret, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. This is Emily. I'd like to ask you some questions, if that's okay. I watched as my daughter spoke to the aunt she never knew she had, asking about family medical history, about grandparents and cousins, about life in Willow Creek. Her questions were careful, factual, almost clinical, the approach of someone trying to maintain emotional distance while gathering necessary information. When she finally handed the phone back to me, Margaret said, "She sounds like you, Lizzie. Has your directness?" "She's better than me," I replied. "Stronger." "She had you for a mother," Margaret said simply. "That would make anyone strong." We made tentative plans to speak again, leaving open the possibility of a meeting someday, though neither of us pressed for it. When the call ended, Emily sat in thoughtful silence. "Well," I prompted gently. "She seems nice," Emily said. "Normal. It's strange to think I have this whole family I never knew about. Cousins, an uncle, a grandfather." I nodded, understanding the surreal quality of discovering relatives who had existed only in carefully curated stories. "I don't want to meet him," she said suddenly, fiercely. "Richard, even if he's still alive somewhere, I don't want to know him." "You don't have to," I assured her. "You don't owe him anything, not your time, not your attention, not even your curiosity." She nodded, seeming relieved. "But I might want to meet the others someday. Margaret, Jane, maybe even my grandfather." She stumbled slightly over the word, still adjusting to the reality of having extended family. "Whatever you decide," I said. "I'll support you. If you want to go to Kentucky, I'll take you there. If you want to invite Margaret here, our home is open. And if you change your mind and want nothing to do with any of them, that's okay too." Emily studied me, her expression softening slightly. "You really have been trying to protect me all along, haven't you? Not just hiding the truth, but shielding me from pain." "That's been my whole life's purpose," I admitted. "From the moment I knew I was pregnant, everything I've done has been to give you the best life possible, the safest childhood, the most opportunities. I didn't know how to tell you the truth without risking all that." "I understand why you lied," she said slowly. "I'm still angry about it, still processing what it means for me, but I understand why you did it. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning, an acknowledgement that while the deception had been wrong, the love behind it had been real. We had a long road ahead rebuilding trust, establishing a new relationship based on truth rather than protection. But for the first time since the genetic testing results arrived, I believed we might find our way through this together. What I couldn't have known then was that our journey was just beginning, that Emily's desire to understand her origins would lead us both back to Willow Creek, to confrontations and reconciliations I had never imagined possible, that the truth, painful as it was, would ultimately set us both free in ways I had never dared to hope for, and that the child I had once seen as a burden, then as a blessing, would become the bridge between my past and my future, helping me finally heal wounds I had carried for decades. But those revelations still lay ahead. That night, sitting with my daughter in our small Boston apartment, all I knew was that we had survived the first terrible truth-telling, and that somehow we would find our way forward together. The months that followed were a delicate dance of revelation and reconciliation. Emily and I established new boundaries, new ways of communicating. She asked questions about my past, sometimes directly, sometimes obliquely, and I answered as honestly as I could, no longer hiding behind protective lies. Her senior year continued outwardly normal. College applications, prom preparations, graduation plans. But beneath these typical milestones ran a current of profound change. Emily was redefining herself, integrating this new knowledge into her understanding of who she was and where she came from. "I've been thinking," she said one evening as we washed dishes together, "about changing my name." The plate I was drying nearly slipped from my hands. "Changing your name?" "Not Miller," she clarified. "I've been Emily Miller my whole life. That's still me. But my middle name, right now it's Anne, after a grandmother who never existed." There was no accusation in her voice, just statement of fact. "I'd like to change it to Eleanor, after my real grandmother." My mother's name. Despite everything, Emily wanted to honor that connection, to acknowledge that branch of her family tree. I was surprised by how deeply this touched me. "I think that's a wonderful idea," I said. "Emily Eleanor Miller. It has a nice ring to it." She smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen in weeks. I thought so too. When her college acceptance letters began arriving, Emily surprised me again. I had assumed she would choose one of the prestigious Boston universities, Harvard or MIT, both of which had accepted her. Instead, she selected Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. "It's still an excellent medical program," she explained when I questioned her choice, "and it's only a few hours from Willow Creek. I can get to know that part of myself, that part of my history, without it defining me." I nodded, understanding her reasoning even as my heart ached at the thought of her being so far away. Not just geographically, but moving toward a past I had spent decades trying to escape. Still, I respected her decision, admired her courage in facing what I had run from. The summer after graduation, Emily proposed something I had never considered possible: a trip to Willow Creek. Not to stay, not to reconnect permanently, but to see, to know, to understand. "You don't have to come," she assured me. "I can go alone or with Margaret. But I'd like you to be there if you can face it." Could I face it? Return to the town that held my darkest memories, confront the ghosts I had fled so desperately. For myself, I might have said no, but for Emily, for the daughter who had been trying so hard to understand herself, to forge a new identity that incorporated the painful truths of her origins, I found I could be braver than I ever thought possible. "I'll go with you," I said. "We'll do this together." And so, 20 years after fleeing Willow Creek in the pre-dawn darkness, I found myself driving back, Emily beside me, as the Kentucky landscape unfolded around us. The town had changed, modernized in some ways, decayed in others, but as we drove down Main Street, memories assaulted me with visceral force. The drugstore where I had bought sanitary napkins with money saved from babysitting, the church where I had sat in silent shame as my pregnancy became visible, the bus station where I had purchased a one-way ticket to Louisville and freedom. Margaret met us at a small diner on the edge of town, neutral territory, away from the family home with its loaded history. She was 50 now, hair graying at the temples, but with the same kind eyes I remembered. She hugged me tightly, then stepped back to look at Emily. "You favor your mother," she said, smiling. "But I see Carter in you too, the cheekbones, the height, good parts from better people." Emily relaxed visibly at this assessment, this confirmation that she had inherited more than just Uncle Richard's green eyes, that her genetic legacy included people worth claiming. Over coffee and pie that neither Emily nor I could eat, Margaret filled in the gaps of the past 20 years. Jane had married young, had 4 children, managed the local hardware store with her husband. Our father had suffered a stroke 5 years back, leaving him partially paralyzed and increasingly confused. Uncle Richard had never returned to Willow Creek, though rumors occasionally surfaced. He'd been seen in Memphis, in Atlanta, in New Orleans. No one knew if he was still alive. "And you've had a good life?" Margaret asked me, genuine concern in her voice. "You've been happy?" I glanced at Emily, thinking of the years of struggle, of fear, of grinding poverty, alternating with small triumphs. "Yes," I said truthfully. "It hasn't been easy, but it's been good, worth every sacrifice." Margaret nodded, understanding more than I had given her credit for. "You were always the strong one, Lizzie. Even before everything. You stood up to Daddy when the rest of us cowered." I had never thought of myself as strong, only desperate, only determined. But seeing myself through my sister's eyes offered a new perspective, a different narrative than the one I had carried all these years. "Would you like to see him?" Margaret asked carefully. "Daddy, I mean. He has good days and bad days, but today has been good. He might recognize you." I hesitated, looking to Emily. This was her journey too, her chance to meet the grandfather she had never known existed. "It's up to you," I told her. Emily straightened her shoulders, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. "I'd like to meet him," she said. "If you're okay with that, Mom." Mom, not Sarah, not Elizabeth. The name that mattered most to me, the identity that had sustained me through everything. I nodded, finding courage in her example. We followed Margaret's car to Jane's house, a neat rancher on the outskirts of town with a well-tended garden and children's bicycles on the porch. Jane met us at the door, her resemblance to our mother striking now that she was middle-aged. Her welcome was more reserved than Margaret's, tinged with the awkwardness of meeting a stranger who was also family. My father sat in a recliner in the living room, a blanket over his knees despite the summer heat. At 75, he was a shadow of the imposing figure who had dominated my childhood, thin, frail, with cloudy eyes and trembling hands. When Margaret introduced us, he stared at me in confusion. "Lizzie?" he said finally, his voice reedy with age. "They said you were gone." "I was Daddy," I replied, the childhood term of address feeling foreign on my tongue. I've been living in Boston. He nodded vaguely, as if Boston might be just down the road rather than hundreds of miles away. Then his gaze shifted to Emily, narrowing slightly as he took in her tall frame, her dark hair, her green eyes. "Who's this?" he asked, something sharpening in his clouded gaze. I took a deep breath. "This is Emily, my daughter." He studied her, confusion giving way to a dawning recognition that made my heart race. "She looks like," he began, then stopped, glancing from Emily to me and back again. "She's my daughter," I repeated firmly. "Your granddaughter." Emily stepped forward, composed despite the tension crackling in the room. "It's nice to meet you, sir," she said, extending her hand. My father stared at her offered hand for a long moment, then slowly reached out his own trembling one to take it. "Granddaughter," he murmured, as if testing the word. Then, unexpectedly, tears welled in his rheumy eyes. "I'm sorry, Lizzie. I should have known. Should have stopped him." The simple acknowledgement, so belated, so insufficient, yet somehow vital, stole my breath. After all these years, my father was apologizing, not excusing, not denying, but admitting his failure to protect his child. "It's done now, Daddy," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "We've both built lives despite it." He nodded, still holding Emily's hand. "You look smart," he told her, "like your mama. Always reading. That one. Too smart for her own good, I used to say." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I was wrong about that too." Emily glanced at me, seeking guidance. I nodded slightly, encouraging her to engage with this fragile moment of connection. "I'm going to be a doctor," she told him. "I start at Vanderbilt in the fall." Pride flickered across his weathered face. A doctor. Imagine that. No Carter ever went to college before. "I did," I said quietly. "Nursing school. I've been a registered nurse for 15 years now." My father's gaze returned to me, something like respect in his eyes. "You did good, Lizzie. Without any help from us, you did real good." The simple validation from the man whose approval I had once desperately sought, then dismissed as irrelevant, affected me more than I expected. I hadn't come to Willow Creek seeking reconciliation or closure. I had come for Emily to help her understand her roots. Yet somehow, in this small living room with its faded furniture and family photos, I was finding a measure of peace I hadn't known I needed. We stayed for an hour, the conversation remaining careful, skimming the surface of decades of separation. No one mentioned Uncle Richard directly again, though his presence haunted the edges of our words. When we left, my father clasped my hand weakly. "You come back sometime," he said. "If you want to." "Maybe," I replied, not making promises I wasn't sure I could keep. Outside in the warm Kentucky evening, Emily was quiet as we walked to our car. Margaret had invited us to stay with her, but we had declined, opting for the anonymity of a motel on the highway. I needed space to process this return to my past, and I suspected Emily did too. "He wasn't what I expected," she finally said as we drove away from Jane's house. "From your stories, I imagined someone, I don't know, bigger, more intimidating." "He was, once," I said. "Time and illness have changed him. But I saw flashes of the man I remember." Emily nodded, gazing out the window at the passing landscape. "I'm glad we came," she said after a moment. "It helps somehow to see where you came from, to understand what you overcame." Her words settled around me like a benediction. For so long, I had feared Emily's discovery of the truth would destroy her love for me, her respect. Instead, it seemed to be deepening her understanding, allowing her to see me not just as her mother, but as a whole person with a past that had shaped but not defined me. The next day, before leaving Willow Creek, I asked Margaret to drive us past our old home. The white farmhouse looked smaller than I remembered, the paint peeling, the fields behind it now growing soybeans instead of tobacco. I stared at it from the car window, memories washing over me, some dark, yes, but others unexpectedly bright. My mother teaching me to make biscuits in the kitchen, reading by flashlight under the covers. Margaret and Jane splashing in the creek on hot summer days. "Do you want to stop?" Margaret asked hesitantly. I shook my head. No, I've seen enough. I had faced my past, acknowledged it, but I didn't need to immerse myself in it. Some doors were better left closed. As we drove away, Emily reached across the seat and took my hand, squeezing it gently. No words were necessary. We both understood that this pilgrimage had served its purpose. She had glimpsed the world that had shaped me, had met the family that connected us to a shared history, however complicated, and I had confronted ghosts I had fled 2 decades ago, finding them less powerful than I feared. We said goodbye to Margaret at the motel, exchanging promises to stay in touch that felt genuine rather than obligatory. As we prepared for the long drive back to Boston, Emily turned to me, her expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking about what to tell people," she said, "when they ask about my background, my family." I waited, heart in my throat, for her to continue. "I think I'll say that my mother raised me alone after escaping an abusive situation, that she was incredibly brave and made a life for us against impossible odds. She met my eyes steadily, because that's the truth, isn't it? The important truth." Tears welled and I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "Yes," I finally managed. "That's the truth. And if anyone asks about my father," she continued, "I'll say I never knew him and I'm better off for it." "Another truth." "Are you sure?" I asked. "You could just say he died or wasn't in the picture. People usually don't pry beyond that." Emily shook her head. "I'm done with convenient lies, Mom, even small ones. I want to own my story, all of it. Not the detailed version, not for casual acquaintances, but the essential truth. I think that's how I honor what you did for me, by not being ashamed of where I came from or how I got here." I looked at my daughter, this remarkable young woman who had absorbed a devastating truth about her origins and was already transforming it into something that strengthened rather than weakened her, who had faced the past without flinching and chosen to carry forward only what served her, who had, in her own way, forgiven me for the lies I had told with love, however misguided. "I am so proud of you, Emily," I said, voice thick with emotion. "So incredibly proud of the person you've become." She smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I learned from the best, Mom. I learned from you." As we drove north toward Boston, leaving Willow Creek and its ghosts behind, I felt lighter somehow. The Thas would always be there, a shadow at the edges of our lives, a context for our choices and struggles, but it no longer defined us, no longer controlled our future. Emily would go to Vanderbilt, would become a doctor, would build a life informed by but not limited by her origins, and I would continue my work, my life in Boston, carrying both the girl I had been and the woman I had become. The price of silence had indeed been steep, years of fear, of nightmares, of carefully constructed lies. But the cost had purchased something precious, a chance for my daughter to grow up loved, secure, unburdened by knowledge that might have crushed her young spirit. And now that the silence had been broken, now that the truth had been spoken and heard and absorbed, we were finding our way to something new, a relationship based on honesty, on shared understanding, on mutual respect. Sitting here now, years later, on my porch in Maine, I watch the autumn leaves dance their way to the ground and think about choices and consequences, about the long arc of a life shaped by both trauma and love. Emily calls weekly from Nashville, where she practices pediatric medicine and raises 2 children of her own. She named her daughter Eleanor after the grandmother she never knew, and her son Robert after Dr. Parker, who helped us start our new life so long ago. My grandchildren know a version of our family history appropriate to their ages, that their grandmother faced difficult times but found her way through, that family is defined by love and choice rather than just blood and circumstance. As they grow older, they'll learn more in careful stages, guided by a mother who understands the delicate balance between truth and protection. Margaret visits occasionally, a bridge between my past and present. My father passed away 3 winters ago. I attended the funeral, standing quietly at the back of the church, acknowledging nods from townspeople who barely remembered the girl I had been. Jane remains distant, uncomfortable with the history we share, but sends Christmas cards with photos of her growing family. As for me, I've made peace with my choices, the desperate flight from Kentucky, the years of protective lies, the painful truth-telling when it could no longer be avoided. I did the best I could with the knowledge and resources I had at each step. That's all any of us can do, really. The wind picks up, sending a flurry of red and gold leaves swirling around my porch. Soon Emily and her family will arrive for Thanksgiving, filling this quiet house with noise and laughter and life. We'll cook together, share stories, build memories that have nothing to do with trauma or secrets or shame. Normal family moments that once seemed an impossible dream to a terrified 15-year-old girl fleeing in the dark. Some might say I paid too high a price for the life we built, the years of fear, of looking over my shoulder, of constructing and maintaining an elaborate fiction. But sitting here, watching the seasons change, knowing my daughter and grandchildren are thriving, I can say with certainty it was worth every sacrifice, every lie told with love, every silent burden carried. For in the end, silence gave way to truth, and from that truth has grown something stronger than either silence or falsehood could have nurtured. A family bound not by secrets but by understanding, not by fear but by love. And that, I believe, is the greatest legacy I could have hoped to create from the broken pieces of my beginning.